Hello, we are reading The Eagle by Rosemary Sutcliff. We are on chapter 4. At the end of chapter 3, we had Marcus and his group of men were coming out. They're surrounded by the local people who are attacking, and they are trying to reach the patrol that's outside so that they can safely get them back into their fortress. And they did successfully get, with their shields out, and they're trying to get them back in, but Marcus noticed a group of people, and at the head is people driving a, what is it called? A chariot. So he's able to successfully attack the charioteer. He thinks he's risking his life, or he knows he's risking his life. He's thinking he's having to give up his life for his men's, but he knows it's worth it. And the last thing we saw was just utter darkness. So, Chapter 4, The Last Rose Falls. On the other side of the darkness was pain. For a long time, that was the only thing Marcus knew. At first, it was white and quite blinding, but presently it dulled to red, and he began to be dimly aware of other things through the redness of it. People moving near him, lamplight, daylight, hands that touched him, a bitter taste in his mouth, which always brought back the darkness, so probably a medicine that's a sedative. But it was all muddled and unreal, like a dissolving dream. And then one morning, he heard the trumpet-sounding cockcrow, and the familiar trumpet call, piercing through the unreality like a sword blade through tangled wool, brought with it other real and familiar things. The dawn chill on his face and an uncovered shoulder, the far-off crowing of a real cock, a rooster, the smell of lamp smidge. He opened his eyes and found that he was lying flat on his back on the narrow cot of his own sleeping cell. So he's back in his place. Close above him, the window was a square of palest aquamarine in the dusky gold of the lamplit wall, and on the dark roof ridge of the officers' mess hall is where people eat in the military, of the officers' mess opposite was a sleeping pigeon so clearly on the roof, so clearly and exquisitely outlined against the morning sky that it seemed to Marcus as though he could make out the tip of every fluffed-out feather. But of course that was natural, because he had carved them out himself, sitting between the roots of the wild olive tree in the bend of the stream. So he's having a memory from his childhood. If we remember, he carved from the wood of a root of a tree, he carved out a pigeon, and he's remembering that foggily, so he's still kind of in that, he's just waking up out of consciousness and getting his facts and memories confused. And then he remembered that that had been a different bird, and the last shreds of his confusion fell away from him. So he was not dead after all. He was faintly surprised, but not very interested. He was not dead, but he was hurt. The pain, which had first been white and then red, was still there, no longer filling the whole universe, but reaching all up and down his right leg, a dull, grinding throb with little sparks of sharper pain that came and went in the dullness of it. Ow. It was the worst pain that he had ever known, save for the few blinding moments when the brand of Mithras pressed down between his brows. Remember, he's got that on him. He hasn't talked about it much yet, but it's a part of his religion. Was getting that brand. So that probably hurt more, but that was very short. But he was not much more interested in it than the fact that he was still alive. He remembered exactly what had happened, but it had all happened so long ago at the other side of the blackness, and he was not even anxious, because Roman trumpets sounding from the ramparts could only mean that the fort was still safely in Roman hands. Somebody moved in the outer room and, a moment later, loomed in the doorway. Marcus turned his head slowly, it seemed very heavy, and saw the garrison surgeon, clad in a filthy tunic, and with red-rimmed eyes and several days' growth of beard. "Ah, Aulus," Marcus said, and found that even his tongue felt heavy. "You look as if you had not been to bed for a month." "Not quite so long as that," said the surgeon, who had come forward quickly at the sound of Marcus's voice and was bending over him. "Good, very good," he added, nodding his vague encouragement. "How long?" began Marcus, stumblingly. 6 days, yes, or it might be 7. "It seems like years. Alice had turned back the striped native rugs and laid a fumbling hand over Marcus's heart. He's checking for his pulse and counting it. He seemed to be counting and answered Marcus only with a nod. But briefly, everything grew near and urgent again to Marcus. The relief force, they got through to us then. Alice finished his counting with maddening deliberateness and drew the rugs up again. Yes, the best part of a cohort of the Legion from Durinum. I must see Centurius Drusillus and the relief force commander. Maybe presently, if you lie still, said Alice, turning to deal with the smoking lamp. No, not presently. Now, Alice, it is an order. I'm still in command of this. He tried to crane up on his elbow, and his rush of words ended in a choking gasp. For a few moments he lay very still, staring at the other man, and there were little beads of sweat on his forehead. Now you have made it worse, scolded Alice in a slight fluster. That is because you did not lie still, as I bade you. He picked up a red Samian bowl from the chest top and slipped it under Marcus's head to raise him. Best drink this. It will do you good. Too weak to argue, and with the rim of the bowl jolting against his teeth, Marcus drank. It was milk, but with the bitter taste in it, which always brought back the darkness, the sedative. There, said Alice when the bowl was empty. Now, go to sleep. Good boy, now go to sleep. And he laid Marcus's head back on the folded rug. Centurion Drusillus came next day, and sitting with his hand, so the Centurion Drusillus is the commander of the relief force. Remember when Marcus prayed and that the fog would lift so that the people would see their cry for help with the smoke, and they are the force that came to help and basically made it where they all survived. So Centurion Drusillus came next day, and sitting with his hands on his knees and the shadow of his crested helmet blue on the sunlit wall behind him, gave his commander a broad outline of all that had happened since he was wounded. I'm sorry. Drusillus is not the captain of the relief force. That's his second in command. I'm sorry. I get that confused. Drusillus is the second in command. So he's listening to Drusillus as he's talking to his commander, Marcus, give the outline of everything. Marcus listened very carefully. He found that he had to listen very carefully indeed, because if he did not, his attention wandered to the crack in a roof beam, to the flight of a bird across the window, to the pain of his wounds, or to the black hair growing out of the centurion's nostrils. But when the centurion had finished, there were still things that Marcus needed to know. Drusillus, what became of the holy man? Gone to meet his own God, sir, caught between the relief force and ourselves. There was a many of the tribe went with him. And the charioteer, my charioteer? Centurion Drusillus made thumbs down. Dead as we thought you were when we pulled you from the wreck. After a moment's silence, Marcus asked, Who brought me in? Why now, that is hard to say, sir, but most of us had our hand in it. I had hoped to gain time for the rest. Marcus rubbed the back of one hand across his forehead. What happened? Nay, now, sir, it was all so quick. Galba doubled back to you and the rest with him, and it was a time for desperate measures, so we took down the reserves, 'twas not much more than a javelin throw, and brought you off. And got cut to pieces by the chariots in doing it? Marcus asked quickly. Not so badly as we might have been. Your wreck broke the weight of the charge. I want to see Galba. Galba is in the sick block with his arm laid open. Sword arm. Drusillus said, How bad is the damage? Clean wound. It is healing. Marcus nodded. You will be seeing him, I suppose. Salute him for me, centurion. Tell him I shall come and compare scars with him if I am on my feet before he is. And tell the troops, I always have, said the 4th Gaulish, was the finest cohort with the eagles. I will, sir, said Drusillus. Very anxiously inquiring the troops have been. He got up, raised his arm heavy with silver good conduct bracelets in salute, and tramped off back to duty. Marcus lay for a long time with his forearm across his eyes, seeing against the blackness of his closed lids picture after picture that Drusillus had left behind him. So he was asleep for all this, but he's about to he's envisioning all that Drusillus kind of painted for him, if you will, from after he was knocked out. He saw the relief force coming up the road, tramp, 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 and the dust rising behind them. He saw the last stand of the tribesmen crumble and the moon-crested fanatic go down. The druid that kind of started it all. The British town a smoking ruin, and the little field salted by order of the relief force commander. Wattle and daub huts were easily rebuilt, and salted fields would bear again in 3 years, but not all the years in eternity would bring back the young men of the tribe, he thought, and was surprised to find that he cared. So remember, after an attack like this, they punish the locals to try to show them that it's not worth it by, if you put smoke on the fields, then it's not going to grow back quickly. It's going to take a few years before their crops will grow. He saw dead men, Lutorius among them. He hoped that there would be horses for Lutorius in the Elysian fields, like the afterlife. Most clearly of all, again and again, he saw Cradock, the huntsman who helped him, lying broken among the trampled bracken of the hillside. He had felt very bitter toward Cradock. He had liked the hunter and thought that his liking was returned, and yet Cradock has betrayed him. But that was all over. It was not that Cradock had broken faith, simply that there had been another and stronger faith that he must keep. Marcus understood that now. Later, the commander of the release force came to see him, but the interview was not a happy one. So this is finally when he's meeting the commander of the force that came when he sent up the cry for help. Centurius Claudius Maximus was a fine soldier, but a chilly-mannered, bleak-faced man. He stood aloofly, or like above emotion, above connecting, in the doorway and announced that since everything was under control, he intended to continue his interrupted northward march tomorrow. He had been taking troops up to Isca when the frontier fort's distress signal had reached Turinum, and he had been deflected to answer it. He would leave 2 sentries to bring the garrison temporarily up to strength, and Centurion Hirpinus would take command of the fort until Marcus' relief could be sent from Isca, when no doubt fresh drafts of auxiliaries would be sent with him. So Marcus and some of his men are going to be replaced. Marcus realized that it was all perfectly reasonable. The relief force were legionaries, line of battle troops, and in the nature of things, a legionary centurion ranked above an auxiliary one. So the centurion who came for help, they are line of battle troops, so troops that are prepared to actually fight in battle. And his group is the auxiliary one, so he's going to hold down the fort literally until auxiliary troops can come, because line of battle troops, a legionary centurion is going to rank above the auxiliary one, the side troops. And if Marcus, was going to be laid by for a while, a relief would of course have to be sent down to take his place until he was once more fit for duty. But all the same, he was annoyed by the man's high-handed manner. Annoyed on Drusilus's account, his second in command, and on his own. Also, quite suddenly, he began to be afraid. So he became very stiff and very proud, and for the rest of the short and formal interview, treated the stranger with an icy politeness that was almost insulting. Day followed day, each marked off in its passing by lamplight and daylight, food that he did not want, and the changing shadows that moved across the courtyard outside his window. These, and the visits of Aulus, and the medical orderly to dress the spear gash in his shoulder, he had never felt the blade bite as he sprang in under the spearman's thrust, and the ugly mass of wounds that seared his right thigh. There was some delay about the arrival of his relief from Isca, for several cohort centurions were down with marsh fever, and the moon, which had been new when the tribe rose, waxed and waned into the dark, and the pale feather of another new moon, so it's been a month, hung in the evening sky, and all save the deepest and most ragged of Marcus's wounds were healed. That was when they told him that his service with the eagles was over. Let him only be patient, and the leg would carry him well enough one day, Aulus assured him, but not for a long time. No, he could not say how long. Marcus must understand, he pointed out with plaintive reasonableness, that one could not smash a thigh bone and tear the muscles to shreds and then expect all to be as it had been before. It was the thing that Marcus had been afraid of ever since his interview with Centurion Maximus. No need to be afraid now, not anymore. He took it very quietly, but it meant the loss of almost everything he cared about. Life with the Eagles was the only kind of life he had ever thought of, the only kind that he had any training for, and now it was over. He would never be prefect of an Egyptian legion. He would never be able to buy back the farm in the Etruscan hills or gather to himself another like it. The legion was lost to him, and with the legion, it seemed that his own land was lost to him too. And the future, with a lame leg and no money and no prospects, seemed at first sight rather bleak and terrifying. Maybe Centurion Drusillus guessed something of all this, though Marcus never told him. At all events, he seemed to find the commander's quarters a good place to spend every off-duty moment, just then. And though Marcus, longing to be alone like a sick animal, often wished him at the other side of the empire, afterward he remembered and was grateful for his centurion's fellowship in a bad time. A few days later, Marcus lay listening to the distant sounds of the new commander's arrival. He was still in his... New people are coming to take his place. He was still in his old quarters for when he had suggested that he should go across to the sick block and leave the 2 rooms in the praetorium free for their rightful owner. He was told that the other quarters had been made ready for the new commander, and he was to stay where he was until he was fit to travel, until he could go to Uncle Aquila. He was lucky, he supposed rather drearily, to have Uncle Aquila to go to. At all events, he would know quite soon whether the unknown uncle was like his father. Now that he could sit up, he could look out into the courtyard and see the rose bush in its wine jar just outside his window. There was still 1 crimson rose among the dark leaves, but even as he watched, a petal fell from it like a great slow drop of blood. Soon the rest would follow. He had held his first and only command for just as long as the rose bush had been in flower. It was certainly pot-bound, and he thought, maybe his successor would do something about it. His successor, whoever that might be. He could not see the entrance to the courtyard, but quick footsteps sounded along the colonnade and then to the outer room, and a moment later the new commander stood in the doorway, an elegant and very dusty young man with his crested helmet under one arm. It was the owner of the chariot team which Marcus had driven in the Saturnalia games. "Cassius!" Marcus greeted him. "I wondered if it would be anyone I knew." Cassius crossed to his side. "My dear Marcus, how does the leg?" "It mends in its fashion." "So, I am glad of that, at all events." "What have you done with your bays?" his horses? Marcus asked quickly. "You are not going to have them brought down here, are you?" Cassius collapsed onto the clothes chest and wilted elegantly. "Jupiter, no. I have lent them to Dexion, with my groom to keep an eye on them, and him. They will do well enough with Dexion. What troops have you brought down with you?" 2 centuries of the 3rd, Gauls like the rest. They are good lads, seasoned troops, been up on the wall laying stone courses and exchanging the odd arrow now and then with the painted people. He cocked a languid eyebrow. Sorry. "But if they can give as good an account of themselves in action as your raw 4th have done, there will be no need to feel themselves disgraced." "I think there will be no more trouble in these parts," Marcus said. "Centurion Maximus took good care of that." "Oh, you mean the burned villages and salted fields? A punitive expedition is never pretty. But I gather from your embittered tone that you did not take warmly to Centurion Maximus?" "I did not." "A most efficient officer," pronounced Cassius with the air of a gray-headed legate. "To say nothing of officious," snapped Marcus. "Maybe if you saw the report he sent in when he got back to headquarters, you might find yourself feeling more friendly disposed towards him." "It was good?" asked Marcus, surprised. Centurion Maximus had not struck him as a type who sent in enthusiastic reports. Cassius nodded. "Rather more than good. Indeed, before I marched south, there was beginning to be talk of some trifle, say a gilded laurel wreath. Remember we talked about it at the beginning of the book. To make the standard of the Gaulish 4th look pretty when it goes on parade." There was a short silence, and then Marcus said, "It is no more than they deserve. Look, Cassius, if anything more than talking of it comes, send me word. I will give you the direction to write to. I should like to know that the cohort won its first honors under my command." "Possibly the cohort would like to know it too," said Cassius gruffly, and lounged to his feet. "I am for the bathhouse. I am gritty from head to foot." He paused a moment, looking down at Marcus, with his air of weary elegance quite forgotten. "Do not worry. I shall not let your cohort—" Marcus laughed, and with a sudden aching in his throat, "See that you do not, or I swear I shall find means to poison your wine. They are a fine cohort, the best with the legion, and good luck to you with them." Outside in the courtyard, the last crimson petals fell in a little bright flurry from the rose bush in the old wine jar.